Welcome to Poland Daily History with me, Nicholas Richardson. In this series of episodes, we're going to be looking at Polish history from a British perspective and also Anglo-Polish relations in a geopolitical context. And I'm delighted to have with me in the studio today Richard Barclay, who is half Polish. He's been living in Poland for 20 years and is able to bring a unique perspective onto this subject. But then, because we come to the Zone War and this very sensitive period where we, of course, and France had given this guarantee, and of course it was called on, and we declared war on Germany.
And lost an empire in the process.
Yes, which would be 2nd of September 1939, if my...
3rd of September.
Or was it third? No, it was the 3rd, you're quite right, it's 3rd. And of course, the plan had been, of course, that the French army would move into...
Which was the biggest army,
Which was
actually.
the biggest, because apart from a sort of half-hearted...
No, we mustn't be nasty about the French.
No, but apart from a half-hearted, because it was half-hearted,
The Maginot Line.
invasion of the Saarland for about 3 days until they gave up.
Yeah.
They
were scared. They were scared. You see, the thing about the French was they were still in shell shock from the First World War. They had not recovered.
Despite having the Maginot Line, despite having the biggest army.
Despite having the biggest army, and despite actually being the most warlike nation on the European continent, the French were always the threat. They were they were the most militarized people, and until Bismarck, knocked the hell out of them in 1870. But even that, instilled in them a real fear.
The irony is, now we know that, in fact, when Hitler invaded the Rhineland, his own general said, we cannot possibly beat the French, this is madness.
Madness.
And Hitler just said, don't worry, they won't attack.
They won't attack, and he was right.
His bluff, and I think his first bluff was called and lost when he never expected the United Kingdom to declare war in September 1939.
And he didn't want it to happen.
No, he didn't want it to happen either.
But England had no choice.
Well, at that point, we had no choice.
And of course,
then we entered, which is really a good example, I think, of this sort of Anglo-Polish this sort of mutual misunderstanding.
Yeah.
We entered this period which we call the phony war because between September 1939 and the Battle of Britain, not much happened. Whereas, of course, for that 6-week period in Poland, you have complete and utter horrific destruction.
And they were fantastic. They were fantastic, the Poles, fighting on two fronts.
Exactly. And then, of course, on the 17th of September, the Russians invaded. And I'm reading a book at the moment, Timothy Snyder's Bloodlands.
Oh, yes.
And I just read before that Roger Morehouse's, which is an excellent book, First to Fight, which looks at this war and says, look, from an Anglo-historical perspective, we talk about a phony war.
But it was a very real war.
Nothing phony for the people of Poland. What I think is particularly shocking when you read this book is we sort of believe or half believe from history that the SS were nasty people, but the Wehrmacht was full of honourable soldiers. And you read this book and you realise that in actual fact the Wehrmacht was as beastly as everybody else.
Of course it
and
was.
This deliberate bombing of civilians, this deliberate killing of civilians,
of course.
which had no military purpose.
Yeah. Well, you might say that about Dresden
it's quite
as well.
shocking. So you can understand, I think, why today, since Poles look at this period and think, well, they were let down by the British and the French.
Yes, but the thing is that you see and I've had this discussion so many times, they don't take into account the fact that Britain had been disarming. Britain sent its expeditionary force. That was the British Army.
Well, I think that's the other point. But by continental European standards, we'd always focused on the Navy and it had a very small army.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at sort of, if the roles had been reversed,
yes,
the first thing I would have said to Poland is, thank you for this guarantee. Where's your Navy?
Yeah.
And I wonder whether Beck and these other people thought about saying to the British, thank you for the guarantee, where's your army? Because the reality is that the French did have a big army, and that was expected.
The French in action, it was the high command of the French that really lost the war.
Because with all
if they could have taken Berlin when Hitler was invading Poland.
Exactly.
They could have taken it, and they didn't.
No, because they sort of gave, and then of course, once that had been, and we had the Russian invasion, once Poland had sort of been neutralised, if I can use that word, then of course the Germans were then free to turn round and drive through.
Well, of course, they hadn't learned from history,
Europe.
had they? Because they would have. Stalingrad and all these places. Just the catastrophic management of that.
But because we get to the Battle of Britain, which of course is for most of our popular imagination, as Britons, of course, we always think of these dashing Polish pilots.
Yes, and they were all very young, and you know why? They were very young, and they didn't live very long because they were all very, very young, and the ideal age for a pilot was 19. Why? Because they didn't think it was going to be them that got hit.
Exactly.
If you can cast your mind back to when you were 19, You know, I remember I used to have this wonderful Italian sports car. It was a Lancia Flavia. And it had one really bad habit. It can do 120 miles an hour beautifully, but it didn't stop always. You put your foot on the pedal and the bloody thing, you know, didn't respond sometimes. And one took that risk. And so I understand these 19-year-olds, you know, the 20-year-olds. And of course the Poles had because of this period of total war that they'd come from. The Poles had a, you know, experience of flying. And there's that wonderful scene, isn't there, in the Battle of Britain
the film.
Where the chaps say, keep formation, chaps. And the Poles are going, yeah, scatter. You know?
Exactly.
And they've all gone. I mean, that's absolutely brilliant. And because they knew, and this is, you know, they hugely influenced the thinking in the RAF. Those big, you know, the dogfights and all the rest of it, you know, really came from them. The other thing is, you know, where did Hitler's officer class come from? They came from the Junkers, and where was Junkerland? Junkerland was
East Prussia, which was essentially this part of the world. Poland,
exactly,
yes.
where you had German landowners and Polish peasants, basically, which is interesting.
And of course, the war took its course, as we all know, and then we had the post-war settlement, which of course a lot of people here in this part of the world think that the Western Allies let down Poland at Yalta.
Well, of course they don't.
But of course, I think the point is in it, which is why Churchill had developed this soft underbelly via Yugoslavia, because he wanted Allied troops as far east as possible when the final whistle went.
Yeah.
And of course, Yalta was too late because it had always been Stalin's view that, you know, wherever the Red Army was when we decided to stop fighting,